Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Today, we'll be talking all about how to increase content engagement through strategy and design. My name is Dennis, and today I'm joined by both Adrie and Vincent from the Foleon team. I'll just pull them up on the screen now so they can introduce.
Hello.
So they can introduce themselves to you. So please, Adrie, if you would be so kind to start.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Foleon's customer content strategist. As you can hear from my accent, I'm American, but I live in Amsterdam. I've been working in the content marketing space for a while now, basically helping both corporates and tech companies develop their first content strategy. And now I get to bring that experience here to Foleon. So I'm working with exclusively with Foleon customers to troubleshoot their engagement, but also content creation processes and everything that comes to make a good Foleon doc. So really excited to be here.
Nice, thanks. And Vin?
I'm Vincent. I'm the creative director at Foleon, and I've got quite some experience in online and editorial design. And that's more or less it as a designer.
Nice. Yeah, so happy for you guys to join me today. So I'm Dennis. I do custom marketing here at Foleon. Also live in the Netherlands, and I've been with the company for about 6 years now. And I will also be the host for today's session. So let's get back to the slides. So before we get started, some quick notes. You'll receive the recording and the slides after the webinar. Please keep an eye out for our polls. I'm starting one right now. And you'll see that on the right-hand side of the webinar if you're not in full screen mode. Also there, you'll find a designated area for questions in the top right and a chat below. It's important that you ask your questions in the questions area so we can see them, because otherwise they would be buried somewhere in the chat. And I would also love for you guys to tell us, just say hi in the chat and tell us where you're from, like what country you're viewing from, so we can have a grasp of who's joining us today. So let's get started. Well, as you all know, the content verge is crowded. This means it's increasingly difficult to get your content noticed, much less read. For instance, did you know that about 6 websites are created every second? That just gives you like a good indication of how crowded it is basically on the internet. And besides that, people are changing. So old formats don't work anymore. Attention spans are getting shorter, and people read less and skim more. I'm sure you can recognize yourself in this picture to some degree. I know that I can. And it's pretty clear that people nowadays only spend seconds on a page, or any content piece for that matter, before they move on to the next thing. So given that, like with that in mind, how do you break through the noise? That's what we'll be talking about today, and why your content needs to be engaging, snackable, and visual. And seeing as most of you, if not all, are Foleon customers, you've already made a good step by moving away from legacy content formats such as PDFs and opting for a more multimedia interactive format. So with that in mind, I would now like to hand over the stage to Adrie, who will be speaking all about making your content more engaging.
Yeah, so just going quickly back to, it looks like I need to share my screen again. Can you see it? No, I need to share it again. So in the meantime, while I figure this out, everyone please answer the poll. That's going to be super important because we're going to revisit it in just a second. But let's get to engagement. That's why you guys are all here. And of course, it's a huge, huge topic, really difficult to cover in just, I think, 45 minutes. And Vincent will be covering more of the visual side of things. I'll be covering more of the strategic and tactical side. But I'll first be taking you through how to troubleshoot your engagement. Now, troubleshooting your engagement, you should also think about if you're not troubleshooting and you're looking at more of creating a strategy around that, using those questions to form the basis of your strategy. So that poll, let's see the responses. All good with the, ooh. Oh, I see. Okay. So yeah, well, only a few of you said excellent, most in the good, fair section. Of course, also a few in the poor. Really understandable. Of course, you guys are not alone. So we're going to go through each and every single one of those elements to see how we can help you. So for those of you who struggled a little bit with that poll, you didn't really know where you stood, well, there are a few things that you can actually do. The first is, well, I think we don't do this enough, but ask what your team thinks, and actually ask for feedback on the content that you're creating for your target audience. So my first piece of advice would be to set up feedback loops. Your team knows your target audience and can give you also really great feedback. We'll also discuss customer feedback or your audience feedback briefly, but that's for the next slide. Also, data check. So what does Google Analytics say about your content? If you haven't already set up Google Analytics to your Foleon docs or on your website, it's a really important step to establish KPIs so you know how you're doing when it comes to your engagement, and so that you could potentially answer that poll question a little bit better. And then finally, a social check. So what are other people saying about your content? So that's part of creating really engaging content, is that people start to talk about it. So setting up social listening, there are a number of tools that can do this for you. Meltwater, Hootsuite. You can even just do a quick Google, but a lot of social media management tools will have these built in. Really important to start there so that you can see what people are saying, not just about your content potentially, but also about the topics that you're covering as well. That's really helpful. So for those of you setting up measuring your content performance, here are a couple of engagement metrics that you can start tracking today. And I've also included a link here to your Foleon, to connecting Foleon docs with your Google Analytics. Of course, we also do have the in-platform performance metrics that you can also check, but good to get more detailed in Google Analytics. I won't spend too much time on this, just because I think, yeah, of course, it's up to you to decide, and we'll also send out a poll to see what kind of content performance metrics are you actually checking at the moment when it comes to your engagement. So answer that poll when it comes by Dennis, and you can see what your peers are saying. And of course, if you're just setting up engagement metrics for the first time, here are a few benchmarks that you can reference, so you know whether or not you're doing badly or you're really exceeding expectations. And of course, for those of you who are already exceeding these expectations or this benchmark, there's always room for improvement. And of course, that also really starts with tracking your engagements. So that poll, Dennis, let's see the responses so far.
Yeah, I saw we don't have any responses yet, but it's probably because people are in full screen mode and are not seeing the poll.
Oh, okay.
So we can
No
give
worries.
people maybe a minute, and then we can come back to this later.
Yeah, definitely. So of course we can of course give you advice on what are the best engagement metrics to track, but I think it's better that you hear it from your peers. So actually, let's revisit that in the question section and see what people say. All right. So getting to the meat of everything. So if you're having problems with your engagement, where do you actually start? Now, I think, as I said before, engagement can be such a huge topic that it can feel impossible to tackle. That's why I've broken it up into bite-sized solutions, or at the very least, questions that might lead to solutions, depending on your situation. So we'll address audience, value, structure, distribution, visuals, experience, and stories. And for those of you who are actually doing well engagement-wise, treat these as your strategic pillars for engagement. And those should be applicable for all content piece, whether on or off Foleon. It's really important to make sure that you have an approach and you have an answer to all of these questions. And not just an answer, but one that everyone on your team actually understands and is able to execute on, whether you're there or not. So good to keep in mind going forward. So I'll start with some of the foundational questions that need to be asked if your engagement is low. The first one, and I think we may not ask ourselves this enough, but do you actually know your audience? this is where you should really start, because that really, if you want to trigger engagement, then you have to know your audience well. So I've included a few links here. Number one, build your buyer personas if you don't have them. Also, your customer journeys. HubSpot makes a really good tool that you can really fill in some very basic details, and it's a really great tool to start with your buyer personas, which will help you understand who you're actually trying to reach with your content. If you already have these but want to deepen that knowledge, conducting customer surveys via Typeform, Google Forms, or honestly, whatever tool your organization uses and can approve, is a really good way to gather more information about their demographics, content consumption, information sources, research topics, and basically what kind of content they'll actually engage with. Also, something you might want to consider is actually calling some of your more loyal customers. These are people who might fit in your ideal customer range, or the people you really, really want to reach in your audience. If you have those already in your network and you're already talking to them, it's a really great opportunity to talk to them about what engages them content-wise. So good to start with at the very foundation, which is your audience and who you're trying to reach. So another foundational one is value. So understanding what kind of value you are offering in every piece of content. So I kind of thought, okay, well, we use this acronym WWJD. So what would Jesus do a lot? I'm not sure if any of you guys have used that before. Maybe it's very American, but I want to switch that around to asking, what's in it for me? So that should be really, really apparent to your audience when they open up a piece of content, or when a piece of content is promoted. So if they click on a link, if they start reading your content, what is actually in it for them? So basically front loading the value of your content to make sure that they not only engage at the beginning, but also stay engaged throughout. So it's important that you also deliver on that value as well. And if you're experiencing low engagement, one of the next things that you might want to check is the structure. I'm not sure how many of you had early schooling where you had to write a paragraph or an essay, and you had to really create a good outline where everything was super clear. Well, that rule still applies, and it does help the reader process and understand what the message is from your piece of content. I also want to institute the 5-second rule, and this doesn't apply to food on the ground, but rather, can your reader actually figure out what they're going to learn in 5 seconds when they open your piece of content? So that can be an index, that can be a really short and concise intro, but it really does help readers actually engage in that first instance. Also, Vincent will go into this in more detail, but typography. And here's a nice example on the right side, but typography really helps reflect the order of importance. And using that within your Foleon doc will really help readers process the information and understand what is most important. And of course, headers. So header 1s, header 2s, header 3s, so on, really help break down your content and structure it in a way that's really understandable for your target audience. All right, so engagement really relies on people actually seeing your content. It's really as simple as that. So that's why I actually created a template for everyone here. Again, these slides will be shared with you. This is an open template that you're welcome to use, but it's basically the foundations of a distribution strategy. So this is looking at all of your channels where you might share content and making sure that you actually have a repeatable process behind sharing content on those channels. So you understand what to share, why, and when. And of course, tracking your traffic, establishing nice KPIs for each channel to understand why people consume content on that channel and what engages people on that particular channel. And I've seen it a lot in my experience where there are teams that treat all channels equally, even the channels where their target audience may not necessarily be active. So let's just say Twitter, for example. If you're targeting a European audience for HR, that might not be the most relevant channel. So that means, and that's also where, looking at where your traffic is coming from really does help. So establishing what channels are actually bringing you the most traffic and engaging people the most. And of course, don't be afraid to cut the underperformers. That's in terms of channels and distribution channels. You might as well focus more of your attention on the channels that you can really tangibly grow than wasting energy on the ones that, are not performing necessarily as well. And that's a decision, of course, for you to make, but one that should be considered for sure. So I don't really want to go into too much depth on this one, just because this is 100% Vincent's space, but I do think that it is worthwhile to answer the question of, are your visuals actually appealing? So here are two really great examples. We have Adrie on one side that they've used really nice color pop on gray. That's super engaging, really catches the attention. Your eyes really go to the country overviews, and then also BDO on the right-hand side. Great use of photography. Really, people like to look at people, and it really does catch your attention. Of course, appealing, super subjective, which is why I'll let Vincent take that one. But it is something that you should consider. And also, if you're worried about the subjectivity of it, again, go back to those feedback loops with your team, but also potentially with your audience as well. That can be really helpful to just ask simply, which would you prefer, A or B? So produce two different kinds of graphics or two different kinds of visuals and see what actually resonates most. All right, so this one is a little bit more tricky. So if none of those questions have really come up with points to actually improve your engagement yet, you might want to consider looking into the overall content experience. So what do we actually mean by that? Well, when people land on your content, how do they actually process and receive the message that you are actually trying to convey? So again, I want to bring you back to a bit of a learning lesson here. So in the 1970s, some teachers, they got together and they developed this model called the BARC model. Basically what it does is it says, okay, well, children and learners learn in different ways. So some people prefer visual, audio, reading or writing, or kinesthetic. So that's touching, experiencing, etc. So, and they've basically found that some people prefer some of these methods, some prefer a combination, and that's where learning is the strongest, but people just naturally process information better in different ways. Now, I don't know why, didn't mean to do that. I don't know why we've kind of abandoned this when it comes to content, because the premise is the same. We're still trying to help people learn about us, our company, potentially our message. And we're simply trying to do that in too limited a way. Now, of course, you guys all have Foleon, access to Foleon. So hopefully you are using more than just a reading and writing approach to content creation and to conveying your message to your audience. But it's good to look at multimedia and making sure that we're catering to all of these different learning preferences, or I guess content consumption preferences as much as possible. So that's why I would really recommend, if you're having issues with engagement, try balancing some multimedia assets. Look at audio, look at video. And of course, I think that's always the recommendation, but I think it's particularly strong when you put it in the perspective of the VARC model. Also, checking the overall reader experience is really important at this point, which is why I've included this link to the Harvard Digital Accessibility Guide. So that's to basically make your content accessible to people with and without impairments. So there are a lot of really great tips in there. You don't have to take all of them, let's just say, but I do think it's really great to help people process your content better, and that can only lead to more engagement. Also, a good rule that I want to put in place is the 2-line limit on your sentences. Now, if you put your, I see a lot of run-on sentences across industries. Yeah, it just happens all the time. I think it's a good rule to keep in mind when you create copy, let's just say in a Google Doc, in a Word doc, to make sure that you limit your sentences to no more than 2 lines in the standard in the standard font, I would say. I think that's 0.11 font. Also, again, going back to structure, making sure that your content is easy to follow, and that starts with structure 100%. That is going to be really important to make sure that your content is actually accessible and processable to your target audience. Clear navigation also goes with it. Accessible on multiple devices. Now, this is a funny one because, of course, you can create the most engaging piece of content online, but if someone, and it's great on desktop, but if it's not accessible on mobile and somebody accesses your link on a mobile device, well, they're not going to have a great experience, and they're certainly not going to be engaged. So good to keep in mind. And also creating snackable blocks. Vincent will talk a little bit about this from a visual perspective, but you can also do this from a copy perspective, and to also just build this into the structure of whatever content you're creating is important. So there are also benefits when you keep these things in mind. So when you create multimedia content, it does benefit breaking down your main content piece for promotion. So you can see this really nice example with Working Nation, that they're promoting their Foleon doc. However, they're doing that with an embedded video that's actually in their Foleon doc. So it's a really nice way of engaging people on social. Additionally, this example to the right has a really great data visualization, which could easily be broken down for an email marketing campaign, could be broken down for social, but is a really great way of breaking up text and engaging people on different channels for promotion. A couple other techniques to break it down. Video, adding video, of course. I think that's always a great one. But buttons, hotspots, overlays. Vincent will talk about this in a bit more depth. The structure helps break it down. Bolding core messages. Now, I think we've had a lot of debates about this internally at Foleon, but you do want to make sure that you are using bolding strategically and wisely. So bolding only the things that you really want people to skim through and understand and get at the end. White space, so leaving space between your paragraphs, leaving space between text blocks, between images. Again, Vincent will go into what this actually looks like, and using stats and pull-out quotes. Again, those are great little assets that you can use for your promotion as well, and to break down the actual content piece you have at hand. So this is the last element, and arguably, I want to say the hardest, mostly because it's realistically one that you should strategically bake into your content creation process. Now, I can understand if you have a piece of content that's not necessarily so engaging and you really want to improve that, adding the story might be the last solution that you have. If those questions haven't helped you so far, you might want to consider reworking it and looking at a storyline. We all know the power of a good story. I don't need to go and expound the kind of benefits of storytelling. There are a number of structures that you can actually use, and I've included a nice little link down there that you can have a look at in more depth to figure out what actually suits your piece of content best. But as I said before, it is really great to look at baking this into your content production process. So when you create a new piece of content, can you fit it into a nice storyline? Can you engage your readers throughout? This is where real creativity comes in the copywriting process as well. But good to keep in mind as it is a really great engagement tool. So just a quick sum up. If you're having trouble with engagement, you should probably ask yourself these questions. But additionally, if your engagement is already pretty good, these are the questions that could form a really great basis for a nice engagement strategy. So if you can answer these questions, but also answer the how. So for example, how do you make your content appealing to your audience? How do you make the value of your content clear? And how do you deliver on it? For example, coming up with rules, well, not rules, guidelines around all of these elements will really, really help you develop a nice strategic base that your team can also understand and execute on. So that was it. I tried to speed through. It's a lot of information. Really sorry. I think there is a question round, if I'm not.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I also have the results from the poll.
Oh yeah,
now.
the poll.
So,
We'll talk about those.
Yeah, so I'll just closing it now, and I will pull up the results for you. Now.
Average session duration. All right, so the people have spoken. Yeah, average session duration is the winner, closely followed by number of pages visited. I think that's also a really great one. Of course, these are all metrics that you can use for your engagement. I would suggest focusing on no more than 1 or 2. Of course, you can monitor all of them if that's where you want to go. And if you're troubleshooting your engagement, of course, I would say, okay, maybe look very closely at why some of those metrics are sitting so low, or why they're so high and another so low. Good to also use.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I also have a few questions from the audience that I'll
oh, great.
Ask you now. So one question is, do you think people should always know exactly where they're going when they see a CTA? Because they feel like a lot of people believe it's valuable or enticing to spark curiosity, right? It's by saying discover or explore. What do you think about that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think as long as you're 100% sure of your audience's intent on that page, so you know 100% that they want to go to your marketing website, or you know 100% that they're looking for pricing, or that they're looking for an additional resource. If you're not necessarily sure, then I would say make it very clear on your button. Otherwise, you can opt for a discover, learn more sort of type style button.
Nice, good. Also have one more question here from James Watson, and he asked, what do you find to be the most effective methods for driving traffic to a site, e.g. paid social or web ads or stuff like that?
Ooh, to a site. So I guess we're talking about Foleon docs or websites. I mean, it really depends on, I know this is not a great answer, but like it really depends on your target audience. And that goes back to looking at the very foundation. So do you know your audience? Do you know where they spend time? Do you know where they consume content? And that's where I say that you should probably be reaching your audience. So I know a number of industries that do really, really well for paid social. Really, their number one channel. However, if you go to another industry like heavy machinery, paid social is probably not going to be your number one channel. So it really depends on your target audience and asking those questions.
All right, great. Yeah, with that, I think we'll continue with Vincent's part.
Great.
So obviously, Adrie, thanks for your talk.
No problem.
Really inspiring. I'll now pull up Vincent.
Nice. Thanks, guys. I'll just dive into it because time is running out and we have a lot to talk about. This is the more practical part. We all know design can be subjective, but all good designs share qualities. And I'm going to talk about some design approaches that help your content to stand out. We start with visuals and some examples of publications because there are great examples created using Foleon. And it might help if you make some notes or check the shared slides afterwards. And please feel free to ask questions like before. Studies show that when adding images, your content is 6 times more likely to be remembered. That's because they transmit a message faster, they trigger an emotion, and they stick in long-term memory better. So please use images. But relevance is a keyword here because you need a connection with your message. And instead of using images as a simple placeholder, which works just less well. Luckily, there are quite some types of images to choose from. The first type is concept imagery, and there are many ways to apply them. And here, Atreides, you saw the example before. Adrie showed it. Atreides does a good job linking concept images to their content. Some are metaphorical, like the hot air balloon you see, and some are more practical, like the baseball used in the USA country reports. But with this approach, there's a lot to choose from, but you need to find some kind of concept that connects to your message. And also you can find them on all kinds of stock sites. And you might want to use our Unsplash integration, which is in our platform. Well, like Adrie already said, Atreides also applies a nice red detail, which ties everything together. So you can have a variety of images, and they will still align great. The next thing I want to highlight is real photography. Most companies use libraries with it. For example, employee portraits, working environments, or events. And these images are almost always relevant. But for important portraits, you might want to use a professional photographer like BDO did that really lifts quality. I love this example. Illustrations are very likely to be remembered. Obviously, they should be aligned with your brand. And if you use more than one, a nice tip is to use multiple from one illustrator, one style for consistency. And in the case of custom illustration, it helps to brief the designer clearly because things can get out of hand quickly. But most stock sites also have an illustration section like Shutterstock or iStock, or well, there are even some free ones going around. And if you're confident, you should experiment with it because it really helps engagement. With a well-designed brand, it might be interesting to apply brand elements as images. And as you can imagine, we're quite proud of this specific customer. Colors, icons, or shapes can be extracted and used as backgrounds or to emphasize facts and figures. And like in this presentation, you saw a few slides before, shapes are great to animate, especially these graphic shapes. And you can also use them in between blocks, or well, you can do a lot with it. If you're low on visuals, you might want to consider type as a visual. You can just pick a letter, a word, or a quote and enlarge it. So the actual shape of the word becomes a visual itself. And if done right, in my opinion, it can even have a bigger impact than using a photo. Excuse me, than using a photo. A piece of advice here is to play around with color, and it might be nice to structure the typography a little bit with lines so it stops floating, especially on like screens that can grow or decrease in size, like mobile devices. It might help to add some lines to add structure because the width can vary. You can also use data as a visual because every company, department, or project most of the times has facts and figures that can be used. And not only can they work as great separator for long content, varying with types of content makes your page more fun to read, in my opinion. And you might also want to consider a whole page for facts and figures, which works really nice within your page rhythm. And Foleon lately got 3 new data elements. We've got a circular element, and we've got a counter and a bar element. I'm not sure if I can point them out, but you might be able to recognize it yourself. And well, they animate really nicely, and they can really lift your engagement. This is the second, well, so-called chapter. It's about styling and layout, and mostly about readers want to know what they can expect. Because with the right styling and layout, you actually guide them through your content, and especially online where boundaries and quantities are harder to recognize. So make sure to apply your style elements and layout consistently, not only for readability, but also for speed up the production, because less mistakes are made. You don't have to redo a lot of stuff. Well, it all starts with your styling sheet. It should cover your brand logos, typography, color, and interaction. And when you use Foleon, the main thing to do is to apply your brand to the theme settings. We often try to create a atomic design where all elements come together so you can compare them before you start. That might help to make decisions. Well, yeah, and as mentioned, you have to use your theme settings consistently so you can change things afterwards because everything is managed centrally. This is one of my favorites, functional color, because in print documents, readers exactly know where they are. And online, things are a bit differently, especially when it comes down to quantity. So there are a few tricks to do the same in your online documents. And in this case, an extra color structure for chapters can provide some guidance. But a simpler way can be to give overlays of contrasting background colors, or to simply create a divider within your page that has a contrasting color. And even within the most strict identities, a light text on a dark background is allowed to use. So make sure to use it because it's very easy. Like Adrie also mentioned, typographic hierarchy. Your content probably has a certain reading order, so it helps to highlight or enlarge specific parts so they pop out. For example, by leading your readers from large to small with a quote, percentage, or heading to start off. As you can see, there are also links down here, so the shared slides should lead you to the actual examples. Content-heavy areas become boring quickly, at least there's a risk, and your audience is likely to leave. So it helps to break such content and make the separate parcels, as we call them, scannable. Here you can divide content by using page and section headers. I think these are two great examples, and they give your content a more predictable structure, and that's what readers really like, or your audience. Our anchor linking can really help with that. As you can see in the left example, the page header, and in the right example, you see a whole list of buttons. And they automatically lead you to a specific part on the page. Don't be scared to use white space. Adrie also mentioned it before. From a design perspective, it's the white space that defines the actual shape. Without it, there's no shape. So don't be tempted to fill all available space. A beautiful visual might have more impact when framed by a lot of white space, or you can draw attention to a headline or a quote using white space. For some, it feels a bit like a luxury, but online, it's for free. In print, it isn't. So just use it. It's really useful. And well, here a lot of things fall together: sectioning, hierarchy, and white space. And I often compare content parcels with eating sushi. The separate bites make your content more digestible, because it can be very annoying having to scroll and scroll without any interruption. So help your readers to breathe by adding plenty of white. And how can Foleon help you to improve engagement? We already discussed text, image, and data elements, and well, I'm going to show you a few more. Please remember to answer the poll question during these slides. From the family of buttons and links, we have the hotspot, and this is a button, and it can be styled with its own image, often an icon, as you can see in the left example of Night Frank. Well, they chose to use their own custom icons. You can really play around here because you can place these custom icons everywhere on a block background image. You can use it for infographics, maps, or product overviews. And often this hotspot leads to a new layer of specific information, and mostly that's an overlay. And I really like the fact that you can stuff a lot of content in there. Maybe not everything needs to be read by your audience, but they can scan and pick what they want. That's really valuable. This one is a bit harder to show within the presentation, so therefore there's a link at the bottom that you can check afterwards, because no matter what, apply animation on elements. You can just use the settings and animate everything within Foleon. Just play around with it, and it will really lift engagement. Another nice feature is parallax. You can apply it to background images, like in this index. When you scroll down, the different images have a different scroll speed, so the layers start to float on top of each other, which is a really nice, refreshing experience. Well, in this way, it's really easy to engage. And Dennis is about to drop a link even in the chat, so you can check it out afterwards. Well, we all know video. It's one of the most engaging elements you can use, and whether it's actual content, like an interview or a decorative background. In Foleon, the only thing you have to do is to paste the YouTube or Vimeo or a custom link into the element. And where copy makes your readers to lean forward, video allows them to lean back, which makes consumption more easy. It's a bit of a relaxed moment. And in the right mix, video can really lift your content. And video might be expensive for some, especially when you have to use a video guy, let's say it like that, or girl. Or maybe it's not relevant for you, but today everyone can pick and play around using concept videos from stock sites. They don't use sound, and they're perfect for covers and header blocks. There are quite a few sites where you can download free videos even. We often use Pexels Video, but if you really want to stand out, it might be interesting to spend some dollars on commercial stock videos, because they can have a bit more quality, like Shutterstock, for instance. So we've talked about all kinds of visual styling and layout and how you can apply them using Foleon elements. I hope this helps you to have some fun during creation, because when you have fun, your documents will probably be more engaging too. So I hope this was...
Yeah, great, Vin.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we also ran a poll in the background. I'll pull up the results for you now, because it's just interesting to see what our customers are thinking. So let me close it and pull it up for you. 1 sec. So here you can see what's their favorite Foleon feature for making their content more engaging. What's your view on this, if you see this? What do you think?
Yeah, well, like we already discussed, it's very subjective. It all depends on what you're trying to message, what you're trying to bring over, but also the type of content you're using. I also really like hotspots and buttons and overlays. Well, they're somehow connected, obviously. Well, it's almost like we say in the Netherlands, comparing apples with pears, because yeah, you might want to use all of them, but yeah, in my opinion, video works really well too. But structuring everything with overlays can help really well too.
Thankfully, we also have that saying in the US as well.
Oh.
Comparing apples and oranges, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, just change the fruit around.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that brings us closer to the finale of our talk today.
Yeah.
As a final note here, we wanted to basically show where how you can hit the bullseye with your content, and it should be if you put enough effort and value into these three areas. So 1 being copy, 2 being design, and 3 being audience. If you master all 3 of those, you'll hit the bullseye. I also wanted to cover some customer questions for you again, Vincent, which I'll pull up again now.
I'm curious.
Yeah. One sec. Here we have a question. Let's see. A bunch of questions. I'll pick one. This from Jen Dolan. So how do you balance the desire for visual elements against accessibility needs as well as growing concerns about balancing the environmental impacts of our collective digital use? Any tips on smart use of visuals without overuse? I think it's multiple questions in one, but maybe you can address at least the balancing the desire between visual elements against accessibility, for instance.
Well, yeah, accessibility for everyone in this case, or because we also use the term accessibility.
So. I think so. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to highlight the final one. Oh, the question
sorry,
is gone.
my bad. Yeah.
Any tips on smart use of visuals without overuse? Well, I think dosing is the right word, the right thing to do there. And by using white space, you can highlight certain things easily. But I'm not sure if your images are relevant. But I know it's very subjective, relevance especially because every identity is different and every message is different. But if your images are relevant, in my opinion, you almost can't overuse it. But well. In the end, you're the judge of that. But well, by using white space, you can it might help to dose your whole page.
Great, nice. Then another question from James Watson. Do you have guidance on how much is an optimal amount of copy for a single page of Foleon in terms of engagement?
Also quite subjective because you've got all kinds of publications. Some have long reads, some have long read pages, some have shorter chunked pages, as we often say it. But in most cases, I like to use a bit of a 50-50% image versus copy percentage.
Okay.
But yeah, well, there are a lot of different pages, but
yeah, I also think that it goes down to kind of the number one, the message that you're trying to communicate, and also the audience preferences as well. So it does again also think about the VARC model, not to rattle on about that too much, but does your audience actually prefer to read and write when it comes to consuming content? But I prefer less is of course always more, but how much less is totally up to your situation and the kind of content that you're producing. So I see a lot of industry reports are very text heavy, and I think they somewhat need to be. However, they do need to be broken up with nice stats or pull out quotes so that people can actually process that information. So if you're unsure if it's too long or too short, ask somebody in your team. Ask somebody in your audience as well.
Yeah, that's a great example. The longer your page is, the more tricks you want to use, actually. Like you said, pull out quotes next to a long read, a very long column, or a divider block in between where you show some percentages or data. And it can really help. So the longer the page, the more tricks you need to use.
Yeah, great. I think we have time for one more question. So you have this one question. Somebody is asking what we mean with hotspots. I'm sure you can explain that very nicely, Finn.
Yeah, sure. Well, a hotspot is an element in Foleon, and it's actually more or less a button. But this button can be placed everywhere on a page. So if you have a map, for instance, in the example of Night Frank we showed before, you can place that button everywhere you want. So that's a really custom positioning way of positioning, and that way you can create a lot. It leads to new content, and you can create infographics, you can create maps, you can create everything.
Okay, nice. Thanks both of you obviously for addressing the questions. I'll now pull up the slides again. So before we conclude today's session, I wanted to give you a few of the key takeaways of today. So obviously, to make your content more engaging, you should be focusing on 3 aspects, as we said. making it engaging, where specifically you should be looking at getting the structure right and also using interactive elements or multimedia where you can. You make it snackable by making it easy to read and scan, but also using white space. And you should make it visual by adding relevant and interesting imagery where you can. And most importantly, you should be learning from your data. So what content is working, but also importantly, what isn't. And doing this, setting goals and KPIs can help you do this. So if you set those and you keep track of them, you can make adjustments accordingly based on what you're seeing there. And then some final notes. As I said earlier, you'll receive the slides and the recording shortly after this webinar. I would also like to ask you to complete our survey. It's really short, but it will help us improve our webinars going forward. Yeah, and with that, I would like to thank you all for your time today.
Yeah, I do
sure.
realize that there are a few questions that came by that we may not have answered.
Okay.
You're
sure.
more than welcome to connect with me or Vincent or Dennis on LinkedIn, and we'll make sure to get to your questions. We just have a limited time. We need to be, of course, conscientious that, people are on, of course, sometimes tight schedules. So we'd love to answer them. Happy to have a chat, but let's take it to LinkedIn or to email.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your day. And talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.